Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fat Muscle Project podcast. I'm John Gorman, one of your hosts today. We've got Lisa Franz in the house. Lisa, what's going on, ma'am? How are you?
Hi, John. I'm
Doing
very well. I'm excited to speak with you and, of course, with our guest Nick today.
Yeah, this is one that's going to be fun. Well, first of all, this is going to be a podcast like we don't typically get to do. I mean, we peel the curtain back on businesses, like we've talked about the six different businesses we've had, and like pull the curtain back. But to have other people come on and kind of open the door to talk about their journey, that's special. So, Nick, first of all, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
well, and thank you for having me.
So we're all in different locations. I'm in Springfield, Missouri. It's one of our locations. Lisa is all over. So like Lisa, where you currently are, you're in South America, right?
Yeah, I'm in Bolivia at the moment.
Yeah. And then Nick, where are you at? Where's your office at? We can see you at.
Yeah, so based in Austin, Texas.
Okay, excellent. So it's already hot as hell down there. Basically, it's April. It's already hot.
Yeah, look, I think we're planning the summer escape here in about 4 to 6 weeks. So,
Yeah. Do you operate in like I know you travel a lot. Do you have different areas that you operate out of, or is Austin, is that your home base? Is that it?
yeah, Austin is home base. Moved here in 2017. Kettle and Fire is headquartered here, and this is where we really grew and expanded the team. And then I know we'll get into kind of backgrounds later, but the current company, LightLabs, we're headquartered here in Austin, but our lab is in Ann Arbor, and then we're building another location in Salt Lake City. So travels tend to pull me to Ann Arbor, which is great in the summertime, get to escape the Austin heat, and then Salt Lake City, which I won't complain about either.
Yeah, 100%. One of my partners is in Salt Lake. I know we're going to get into the businesses, but while we're talking about geography, is there a reason why you're in Austin? A lot of founders, a lot of very successful people love the Austin.
Yeah,
Is there any of that to it, or is it just happen to be where it is?
no. So the reason I chose Austin, so when I started Kettle and Fire, I started it immediately after high school and ended up not going to university and grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania called Schwenksville, Pennsylvania. And after spending 3 years there, living at home, trying to make Kettle and Fire work, got it to a point where I could move, and I was dying to move. And one of my best friends at the time, he moved to Austin. And so I visited him and decided, 10 days later, I'm going to move here. And it was a very, very quick decision. And there was almost no competition. It was either stay at home, live in Tranksville, which was not an option, or it was moved to Austin immediately. So that's how I ended up here.
Yeah, and before we get into the rest of it too, I'm always going to jump off track and think of questions that pop up. So, growing up, were you always, because to me you're an entrepreneur's entrepreneur now, you know what I mean? Did you have those traits like when you were in high school? Did you think of like my son figured out how to DoorDash food and sell it to his friends in eighth grade, right? Like he thinks like an entrepreneur, like selling
Yep.
candy to other kids. Is that kind of something that you had growing up, and did you have influences in that kind of an area?
Yeah, I would say definitely growing up, I kind of hate this like cliche idea of, most entrepreneurs feel like they're entrepreneurial trying to do something in high school. So I was that, but I know plenty of other founders who've been successful and that wasn't the case and they kind of figured it out during or post college. But I think for me, I didn't love school. My attention was pulled elsewhere. My older brother at the time, he started a company. It wasn't a great success, but even just through the attempt of starting the company, he found an incredible mentor that brought him under his wing, and he just, found great success through failure. And I think that really stood out to me as a, 12, 13 years old at the time of this is a really interesting path. I felt kind of attracted and compelled to follow in his footsteps, take my own shots, knowing that you don't need to have success in order to have a great outcome. The great outcome can be expanding network, it can be finding mentors, it can be like landing or trying to start your own company. You fail, but through that, you've done something unique and different that allows you to then work your way into a startup where you can kind of develop the skills and inevitably go back for another shot at starting your own thing. And so early on, I just think it was kind of the idea of getting as many repetitions as possible. And when you're in high school, there's no cost to failure. You're
Yeah.
living at home, you're going to school. So why not take some swings? And that was kind of the mindset that I had. So yeah, through sophomore, through senior year, very much tried my hand at a couple of different things. All of them great failures, no success. And Kettle and Fire was actually the fourth company. I you can't even say I tried to start companies. It was like the fourth project, the fourth attempt.
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
it starting something that thankfully landed.
And let's get your thoughts on college because, it's different for everybody, but to have someone that's been as successful as you, it's different. Like I'm almost 50
Yeah.
years old. So college back in 1996, when I, was straight out of high school is a lot different than, you would have been going in what, 2015, 2014.
Hmm.
And it's even different now, 10,
Yeah.
11 years later. I don't feel like it's as important now, especially with all the learning you can get online. But someone as successful as you, what would you talk to a young guy or young girl about? That's like, hey, I've got these entrepreneurial ideas. Should I go to college? What would you recommend on that area?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because any take probably given today might be an outdated take in 12 to
Yeah.
18 months time.
Yep.
And I actually think that probably speaks to the idea that, you know, cost of college is incredibly expensive, cost of learning is incredibly inexpensive. It's really how curious are you as an individual and how hard are you willing or how much are you wanting to make it work? I think if you can't get into the top 10% of universities, I think the utility drops off pretty quickly in terms of expected value and return, especially to your point with how much is available online and how quickly you can learn on your own. So, self learning, I would take 90% of the time. I still think there's probably I know there's value still to some of the branding around certain universities. The social interactions experience is really hard, almost impossible to replicate outside of university. So I'm willing to admit that there's value there that you can't necessarily find outside of college. But the question just becomes, is the value worth the expense? And I think university is just so ridiculously costly and expensive that it's hard to justify that it's worth it just for the pure social experiment, if you will. Um,
Yeah.
but the good universities, I think, are only going to get inherently more valuable as it becomes easier to kind of self learn, self teach. So if you're academically gifted, driven, and you can get into one of those universities, I don't think it's a bad bet. I think it's probably the greatest insurance policy for your future. But if you can't, then I might argue that 4 years in a like mediocre to subpar university is just not worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it sounds like the most important part for you was figuring out who you were quickly, right? Not everyone is
Yeah,
built for the system and built for school. They hate it.
yeah,
And I've met a lot of entrepreneurs, like I'm the same way, that are built that way. And you recognize that early. So do you feel like that's a key thing for a young person to figure out? Because that's fucking hard. Like for a young person to
yeah.
figure out whether they're built for that is tough. Was that easy for you to figure out?
No, it was not. But I might argue, though, it's tougher as you get into this debt that you'll never be able to climb out of, and then you have
100%.
to work, 9 to 5 that you hate, and so you just kind of like fast forward the hard decision making to high school years instead of figuring that out over college, and then by the time you incur this large debt that maybe the job market that you hoped for is not even there, like you might not even be working in the area that got your diploma. And so I would argue that yes, it's hard. Yes, it's difficult, but it's worth doing as quickly and early as possible because the cost of not doing it, like there's a material cost to that. So
Yeah.
it was hard, but it was worth it because I think the alternative is harder.
And let's go ahead and jump in. We really haven't done a proper introduction because that's the way I roll. I start jumping around and asking questions because I'm a nerd and I want to know all the things. So let people know a little bit more about you that we haven't talked about, and then we'll talk about starting Kettle and Fire.
Yeah, yeah. So I co-founded a health wellness brand called Kettle and Fire. It started with my brother Justin back towards the end of 2015. We've scaled that now to 50, 60,000 retail stores, 9 figures in annual revenue. And I think for us, the beautiful thing is it afforded us the ability to understand like what are some of the pain points and points of friction that exist for us as a scaling consumer brand. What are some opportunities that we see that others are not executing on beyond just the CPG brand world? And where do our interests exist and what do we want to build next? Where that's always been the filter that we've used, which is Kettle and Fire, bone broth, something that we've been insanely passionate about for a long time. But it's definitely like broadened and expanded our scope of passions. And that's led us to start other companies that we wish existed as a brand, as founders of Kettle and Fire. And so that's led me to starting two other companies. One was in the financing space, which exited tail end of 2022. And then the most recent company is in the lab testing space called LightLabs, with the idea that testing should be cheaper, easier in order to incentivize transparency in the consumer goods industry.
Can you talk about Peter Thiel? Like, talk about
Yeah,
that being a Teal fellow. A lot of people don't understand what that means and how cool that is. Can you talk about that?
yeah. So Thiel Fellowship is basically built and designed for, I think the mantra is, you know, for people whose ideas just can't wait effectively to get started. And so Peter had this idea that he wanted to fund 20 people every single year, $100,000 to drop out of college, or in the case of me, not go to college, so that they could pursue the idea that they had. And so I got I got that back in 2016. It's a standard application process, go through multiple rounds of interviews on site, and then of course you get awarded. If you're one of the 20, you literally sign a contract that states if you go to college, you return the money, and you're effectively guaranteeing that 2 years you're not going to be going to university and focusing your time on building the thing. And it's amazing. There's no equity, nothing but support, incredible network. Obviously, it's yielded some great successes, wildly more successful companies than Kettle and Fire. But from an experience standpoint, I think it's the closest thing that I got to replicating maybe the social experience that exists within university is you have this tight knit group of 20 people all interested in taking swings outside of college. And so there's kind of this common thread that ties you all together, which is what I found to be most useful, is just the shared experience and some level of social experience outside of college. But that's for 2 years. And then after that, if you need to, of course, can go back to university. But thankfully, Kettle and Fire did well enough where, 2016, 2017, 2018 just kept tripling year after year. And there was never a need for me to go back to college.
Yeah, super, super cool. In a very, I'm sure there were a ton of people that applied for that, right? So to be able to
Yeah,
be,
it's a
you
decent
said
number.
20, yeah, to be one of 20 is a pretty big deal. We'll get to the revenue and the growth and all of that, but let's talk about Kettle and Fire, the name, and what made you guys want to start this company. What was the driving force?
Yeah. So when I was a senior in high school, I tore everything on my knee but my ACL playing soccer and had to get reconstructive knee surgery. Part of that was, bedridden for basically 2, 3 weeks on crutches for 9, 10 months. Throughout this process, I just didn't want to, I'm a senior in high school, didn't want to blow up by 20, 30 pounds. Therefore, I got really particular about my diet, what I was eating. And at the time, kind of two things happened. One, my brother Justin, who's older than I am, he was getting into the paleo diet. And
Mhm.
within the paleo community, this is early 2014, uh, bone broth was becoming more and more popular. And at the same time, I remember reading ESPN, and there's literally an article about Kobe Bryant drinking bone broth to aid in his Achilles heel injury, where a
Yeah.
chef would travel with him to all the hotels, make a pot of bone broth. And I remember reading it, I was like, interesting. If it's good enough for Kobe, it's definitely good enough for me. And at the same time, my brother pointed out bone broth as this growing trend within paleo, where the only options were either you cook it for 48 hours yourself, or you had to buy it frozen, 2-day delivery, dry ice, just like a very there's no pain-free, hassle-free way to buy bone broth. And I have
Yeah.
5 brothers, one sister. My mom said there's no way that we're going to be tying up the kitchen stovetop for 48 hours, which is a very
Yeah.
fair response by her. And so the idea originally was let's just make a shelf-stable bone broth where it's high quality, grass-fed, grass-finished, and it's hassle-free, where there's no minimum order of 200. You don't have to ship via 2-day and dry ice. Cold chain logistics are very difficult, very expensive. And so the only way that we wanted to launch and do this was if we could figure out how to do it shelf stable. And so that really started the journey. I still remember having the conversation with my parents, who, credit to them, were very supportive. The idea of me not going to college for a year, 2 years, trying to start a company while I figured out what I wanted to do. Kettle and Fire was supposed to be a side project while I figured out what I wanted to do. And the ceiling was I might be able to make $5,000 a month. And that would be incredible. 18-year-old, really give me a lot of freedom to
Yeah.
then understand what's the thing I want to get involved in. What do I want to start, or what company would I like to join? So that's how it started. And then thankfully, we were wrong about market size, market opportunity, number of customers that would be willing or wanting to buy bone broth. And so there's just a classic saying of, you can get a lot of things wrong or do a lot of things incorrectly, but if you get the trend right, that's all that really matters. And this is just a very prime example of
Yeah.
I
how
feel
true
like
that
it was
is.
the
Where,
perfect time for sure. I have a bit of a like a CrossFit background, and I mean that was like the height of the CrossFit era. I would say like
yeah,
2014 to I don't know 2018 or something. And amongst the CrossFitters, obviously the paleo diet being the predominant thing being talked about. And I like vividly remember people like sending out recipes about bone broth and the rest of it.
yeah,
And then at some point, the name Kettle and Fire started ringing. So super, super cool and interesting to hear how that all came about.
yeah. And then from a naming perspective, right, when we launched, it was called Bone Broths Co. And the reason why is, again, I thought it was going to be a side project. I'm terrible at branding. And so I just named, one, it was what domain could we get? And then two, it's like we're going to be incredibly on the nose because we're selling bone broth. And when we did our first production run, we sold out within 2.5, 3 weeks. We then did another production run, same thing happened. And this was towards the end of 2015. And that's when we realized that, all right, there's a real opportunity here to build a brand. Bone Broths Co. is not a brand that you probably can build around. Therefore, it required a shift. And so that's where we started to really think deeply about, you know, what what is required. Bone broth has been a part of our diets for an incredibly long time. And so the idea is like, what was required to make bone broth, thousands of years ago? And it was just bones, water, kettle, and a fire. And of course, bones and water didn't belong in our brand name, and that left us with kettle and fire. And so that's how we came up with it, and relaunched early 2016, and haven't looked back since.
I love it. And I think one of the things that people I think need to hear, and I've seen this with numerous people that I've met in my circles. Some of the most successful people are the ones that solved a problem for themselves, right? And this started when you injured your knee and you found this and you did the research. I mean, again, I'm a huge Kobe Bryant fan, so like I would have drank it just because Kobe's drinking it, first of all. But you
Yeah.
know, the fact that you solved your problem and it was an intimate, personal issue, I think that's important because some of the most well-respected experts are always people that fixed a problem for themselves, right? And
Yeah.
there's money in that, and people can take a business and build it off of that. So, um, I do want to talk about your first 4 months, what I was able to find online. You've already kind of alluded to, but it's reported on the Google machine when I put it in that you hit around seven figures in 4 months. Is that accurate when you guys first launched?
Yeah, yeah. It was, I mean, look, building a brand back then, building an online D2C business is and was fundamentally different than how you
Yeah.
would build one today.
Yep.
And back then, I kind of joke, it's like influencers back then could actually influence buying behavior,
Yeah.
and there was fewer of them. Now, a lot of people are influencers with no influence whatsoever.
Yep.
But we were able to align ourselves with the right people who had a captive audience, who could push out emails, do posts on Instagram, and it actually influenced buying behavior and drove a decent bit of traffic. And so that's how we built the early customer base, was through these affiliate partnerships with paleo leaders and paleo communities that allowed us to go from, 0 to 7 figures fairly quickly.
I feel like, so I was part of the height of that at another company. And I remember like 2015, 16, 17, 18, like there's a lot of money to be made by having the right influencers. I feel like that now where we have exhaustion from it, fatigue, I would call it,
Mhm.
marketing fatigue in general, but with social media, I would say influencer fatigue. Um, do you feel like that's a real thing? And is that something that you guys have kind of changed your stance on? Like, is that not so heavy of a part of Kettle on Fire now because it's just so inundated in our lives?
It's a good question. I definitely understand. I do think that there's been a little bit of watering down of what it means, obviously, to be an influencer, given the sheer number that exist. But it's still an incredibly potent and scalable strategy. And so for us, it's more of a shift in how we approach and how we think about it, less so us completely delevering from influencers, social media as a strategy. I think it's a component that is required, but not necessarily the component that we invest and pour the majority of our marketing dollars into.
Yeah. I One of the thoughts that I have is just finding back then just a lot of people had influence, finding people that have genuine influence and genuine organic followings and all these people that truly value them. It's just harder to find. And I think, like you said, I think it's just so watered down because there's just so many more people on social than there was 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, there was a lot. So I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to the marketing side of things. So, what are some of the other tactics that, as this kind of grew into 2019, I've got down that Forbes reported 35 million in sales, and you were in 7,000 stores nationwide. So that's like 3 years into this thing. Is that accurate?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And now when we look at Kettle and Fire today, it's quite the interesting shift. Reason being is 99.5% of our sales are retail through channel stores. Um, the reason that's true is we've historically run into supply chain issues, which is a great problem to have, but still a problem to be solved. And as you step more into retail, you cannot sacrifice inventory to support your direct to consumer store and Amazon. Because obviously these buyers will, it's like three strikes and you're out. And
Yeah.
so we've just had to historically prioritize available inventory for retailers to support that growth, that strategy, which obviously was the right call, just given the size of the business today. But it has meant that, people always ask me would I start another brand, and the answer is no, simply because I don't have a strategy. Because our direct to consumer online strategy has been hamstrung and handicapped by lack of available inventory. And
Yeah.
so it's something that we're very excited. We've invested a lot in our supply chain in the past 12, 18, 24 months. And that's changing. And, this year we're going to be, I mean, last year and this year, reinvesting heavily. But in terms of the playbooks that worked for us when we were heavy exposure from a revenue perspective, 2016 to 2020, early 2021, are no longer really applicable, just given
Yeah.
how much of the landscape has changed between 21 and 26. So we're excited to relearn and deploy new strategies, but it really has been retail for us. It's been in the name of the game for the past 5, 6 years.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So in the podcast before this, we had on my partners with Cranium Energy, and our goal is to be in every brick and mortar that we can get into. While the online sales are great, and we're doing that in the beginning, but the goal is, like you said, 99.5% you're in retail locations. And to get to that, like we had to raise some money to get ready to get stocked up to get into these different distribution networks.
Yep.
You probably had to do, I had looked it up, maybe a $10 million investment round I guess that was to help scale you guys to be able to get into these 7,000 locations. What was
Mhm.
that like raising money for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. To be honest, Bobby is the one who led it. Clayton Christopher over there at the time when he was with the firm. It was, I'm not going to say easy, but it was definitely easier than I expected. It's like nothing ruins a good story like bad data. And thankfully, we had a good story and we had great data from the
Yeah.
traction that we were seeing online. We got into Whole Foods off cycle serendipitously. One of the buyers, back in early 2016, where they could still really make decisions at the regional level, he reached out to one of his friends who ran a brokerage, Green Spoon, and said, "We want Kettle and Fire in, or I want Kettle and Fire in my region. Let's get them in off cycle." He actually got promoted to global and he took us with him. And so we went from one region in Whole Foods mid 2016 and 2016 to then going global and nationwide with Whole Foods May 2020 or 2017. And so that was a very fortunate, like obviously the numbers supported it, but I don't think we expected to move as quickly as we did in the early days into retail. And so when we raised that round mid to end of 2018, it very much was to support, obviously the volumes that we are doing both online and through Whole Foods and some other key retailers, but also the continued expansion through retail, where there's this narrative 2020, 2021 that retail is dead, e-com's taking over, but it's like 85% of all transactions still take place offline through brick and mortar. And
Yeah.
even Walmart alone, I'm pretty sure it's like turns through the US population every 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we did not fully appreciate or understand just how quickly the retail business could take off. But the trade-off is it's costly, right? You have to invest a lot in trade dollars. You have to invest a lot in inventory because you can't run out of stock. And so there was this like forcing function of the scale that we were growing just required some venture dollars. And so, yeah, we raised that round 2018. And then I believe that was the last primary capital that we've taken in.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. A lot of people, when they start off, like we started off very mom and pop. We got our own location. Like we've jumped to three different headquarters at this point. We're just got this one. We're about to bust out it if we're not careful. Did you have any of that involved in the early days? Like, did you guys have your own warehouses and spaces, or did you immediately outsource all that so you didn't have to have the headache?
Yeah, we outsourced, right?
Yeah.
Being 18, I was poor as shit. So
Yeah.
I had no dollars that I could invest into building our own supply chain, let alone the bet was this is a side project, or we think it's going to be a side project. Therefore, all I cared about was building a business that could scale to what I thought the ceiling being $10,000. And
Yeah.
so that required certain decisions to be made. And one of them was leaning into contract manufacturers, 3PLs,
Yeah.
which was the right decision and continues to be the right decision. Granted, we've built some portion of our own supply chain out in order to support the expansion and growth, but it's very different making that decision, 2024 than 2020 or 2016 when we're
Yeah.
9 figures in revenue and able to support and afford it off our own balance sheet. So the right decision, and we would not have been able to scale and grow as fast and also like as capital efficient if we had to build any of that portion in house.
Yeah. I love it. I love the nuts and bolts and in the weeds information like that. One of the main questions that I have, and I think I know the answer because you've already kind of alluded to the communities that you tapped into, but how did you make bone broth sexy? Because there's a lot of people that don't have an imagination or they're not great with branding. And they're like, it's bone broth. I mean, you talked about
Yeah,
the first name, right? But how did you make it sexy to where
it's a
everybody
great
wanted it?
question.
That's the thing. You know what I mean?
I think for us, we just obsessed over the quality, and then the quality spoke for itself. And when you look at bone broth has definitely there've been a few trends that bone broth has benefited from. It's like 2015, 2016, you have your CrossFit paleo community. 2017, 2018, it's the keto community, adding MCT oil to your bone broth. So you get
Yeah.
both the fat and the protein. And then, it's fasting, where it's incredibly beneficial to break a fast with bone broth. Then it was gut health. And now it's everyone cares about increasing their protein. It's like bone broth, a box of our beef bone broth is 20 grams of protein, 80 calories. It's just like a protein macro bomb. And so I think what we've just obsessed over is the product quality. It's the inputs, knowing that the output will be this incredibly rich, nutritionally dense product that people will want to consume. And I think the reasons why people have wanted to consume it has varied over the past 10 years, but it's led to consistent, like habitual consumption. And so I might argue, I always like to joke like bone broth is an incredibly unsexy, sexy business. And that
Yeah.
still is true today. I I'd like to think that we've made bone broth sexy, but there's something
Yeah.
inherently unsexy about bone broth. But
Yeah.
it is so nutritionally rich, uh, protein dense that once again, it's just been almost like a foundational piece and unit of a lot of these trends, but not a trend itself. And so now it's just part of a lot of people's daily consumption habits for many different reasons, right? It's like college is another one that was primarily like a driver of why people were consuming bone broth 2016, 2017. Gut health continues to be a really big one, but the biggest now is going to be protein and increasing protein consumption when you don't really have an appetite. It's like it's not hard to drink a box, 2 boxes of bone broth whatsoever, and you're getting 20 to 40 grams because of it. So I just think we obsess over the product, and then thankfully, time in the market kind of beats time in the market, as they say. And for us, we've now been in the space for 10 years. And we've just been able to take advantage of a lot of these trends that have just kind of accelerated the bone broth trajectory.
Yeah, and I
So
think
this,
with the help
go
of
ahead.
the influencers, I could imagine that they showed people some different ways of how you can incorporate that. Because of course, like I guess as a child, I thought like bone broth that's just part of soup, full stop, and you don't do anything else
Yeah.
with that. But now we know like oh, you can put it even in your oats, or you can cook rice with that, and you can here's this and that recipe. And I could imagine like the people that were endorsing the product probably also did a good job
Oh
showing
yeah.
people like or you could even make it like add even more protein powder to that. Hypothetically, it's something savory, but you can also include it into sweet products because it doesn't have that much flavor to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, use case is incredibly versatile, right? Anywhere that you use a cooking broth, bouillon, you can replace with bone broth for a more nutritionally enhanced product. So, very much agree. I think the use case and application of a bone broth is just drastically expanded, and people are finding more and more creative ways to use it thanks to a lot of these influencers.
Well, speaking of protein, because we have a manufacturing plant, I see not just from the supplement company side, but from the manufacturing side, the prices of whey are through the roof, which
I
is
know.
causing the prices whey isolates through the roof. Which so then we started using more like WPC80, which is a high grade whey concentrate. We started using more of that because it's good, and then we're even seeing casein prices go up because everybody's trying to shift to use some of the other stuff. Has it hit you guys yet? Like, have you seen any bumps? Or are you pretty, so you're
No.
well insulated from that. So that's a good thing on your end.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're taking what is a natural byproduct of a process, and we're taking the bones and we're repurposing them to make bone broth. And
Yeah.
so, as long as there's continued beef consumption in the US or around the world, we'll always have a supply of bones. And so we're completely cushioned from any of those market fluctuations within the protein world.
And I think I need to go back and I missed one point, and maybe you touched on this, but you talked about when you first started it, you either had to cook it for 48 hours, which no one wants to spend the time to do, or you have to buy it and it was frozen and sent to you. You guys are really one of the first shelf stable products. And I think our listeners need to understand that. Like, that's one of the big keys here. How hard was it to get that process done?
Very hard. I had to call 600 manufacturers over the span of 7 to 8 months until I found one that could do it, was willing to do it. I think two things were true. One, it's hard to do, right? Because you're basically taking these tanks that are traditionally turned every few hours for a different batch, different product. We're asking them to tie up line time for 24 to 48 hours. Two is you're taking a risk on an 18-year-old, which obviously is some pretty significant risk. And so we needed a lot of things to be true. So we needed the right manufacturers, USDA certified, willing to cook for long periods of time, and also willing to work with an 18-year-old. And that was hard to find. But we found the right manufacturer, and we still work with them to this day. But it very much was a time consuming process of just getting kicked in the nuts for 6 to 8 months of
Yeah.
no after no. And finally we got our yes though. It was worth it.
And that also makes me think, I've seen and heard of people that were younger and they would have two different business cards when they would go in to try and sell their business, right? One was president, CEO, the other one was sales manager, right? And it depended like
Yep.
on how people want. Did you not always let people know that you were 18? I know in this world like Zoom, like you can't hide like the baby face when you're 18, right? But did you do anything to try and shield yourself from people knowing, hey, this is an 18-year-old?
No, so I think one of my benefits of trying a lot of different things in high school to start a company is I got very comfortable. Well, one, I have three older siblings. Uh, the two oldest are brothers, and I feel like I've always grown up around people older than I am, like
Mm.
family, but also their friends. So I've been comfortable being younger, just around older people. Two, I I have a deeper voice, which definitely worked in my favor. And so when I'm making these phone calls, I don't think the assumption was always, this guy's 18 or this kid is 18 years old. I would never disclose it. It never helped me. Therefore, I would just operate at some point, right? It would probably come out. And my hope was we're already far enough in a
Yep.
process or the process where it's too costly for them to back out.
Yep.
So that was always the goal is speed run through a process, get to a point of no return. And if they figure it out, then they figure it out. But we're already kind of like committed.
I,
So
I,
it posed an issue in some places, primarily when it came to negotiating down payments and credit terms, which I
yeah,
did not get for the first five, six production runs, rightfully so.
yeah,
And so we just had to self fund based on profits. And that's why our product originally was so expensive, is because that was the only way that we could self fund was by selling the product. We needed enough margin in order to support and buy the next, 5,000 cases of bone broth, simply because we could not get on credit terms. And I don't blame them.
yeah. That brings another thing up. A lot of people they hear these numbers and they hear seven figures in 4 months and they think, man, that's a lot of money. I wonder what you were paying yourself or how much money you put in your pocket and things like that. When did you first start to be able to take some of that money and live off of that? Was it pretty quickly with hitting numbers like that, or did you
No,
send it all back into the company?
no, it was all back in the company. I was making no salary or basically making, well, Teal Fellowship was actually the primary source of income, which is
Yeah.
$50,000 a year for 2 years. And then only in 2017, when I moved to Austin, paid myself, and that's after Teal Fellowship rolls off, like I think it was $80,000. And that was true until raised Series A. So I mean, you just have to deploy every dollar back into the business, right? You can't afford to take any money out, especially if you're trying to grow responsibly and not take outside capital. So no, every dollar for the first like 3.5, 4 years was just put right back into the business. It's why I lived at home. I did not live at home by choice. It
Yeah.
was out of necessity.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about kind of 2020 and beyond. Where you're at, like what's current revenue look like in this day and age? Because we've kind of touched on to up to 2020. How's revenue look for the company? Because everything I've looked at and just talked to you briefly, like it's still just going straight up.
Yeah, it's low hundreds of millions per year now. We built out our own manufacturing facility to support growth of the business. We're sold in, I always get this number wrong, and sales team will kick me underneath the table, but I think it's like 50,000 stores now, and continue to grow year over year, healthy clips, which has been the most wild and insane part to see. So it's been amazing, right? My brother and I incredibly proud of like what the team has built. We took a step back to actually start different companies about 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago. So we have an amazing team that's been with us since the very early days that now really run it, and it's wild what they've been able to do. The business has doubled since we left. So clearly, my brother and I needed to leave sooner, but it's been awesome.
I
It's taken
I
everyone by surprise, right? Like when we started the company, goal was five, $10,000. Then we started to do well, and we thought, you know what, maybe we can get this to 10, 15 million a year in revenue. And how insane would that be? And now
yeah.
it's just like, you see the monthly numbers coming in, and that's what you're doing consistently. And it does not feel real.
Yeah, it's one of those things I have on here next to talk about. Um, some of the wins today versus 2015. Like how can you make that comparison? Because you're a completely different person, 10 years older, right? So when you look at wins back in 2015, 2016, and then you look at wins now, kind of compare some of those if you would. Like I don't know if you had like this big 2016, like maybe this big retailer came on board and gave you a shot and
Yeah.
you're like hell yes.
Yeah. I mean, for me, still remember exactly where I was when I read the email that we got Whole Foods National in 2017, or we got confirmation end of 2016, and it happened May 2017. that was a massive win. I mean, I still remember to this day, we were buying the first 5,000 cases of bone broth. It was 6 units to a case. I remember sitting in the bathroom just being like, how are we going to sell 30,000 units of bone broth? Like, that is a fuck ton of product. This is
Yeah.
near impossible. And I still remember, I was like, you know what? Worst case scenario, it takes us, let's see, shelf life 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years. Like, that's absolute worst case scenario. I think I can sell 30,000 units over the span of 2 years. And just selling through that first production run was a very magical moment for
Yeah.
me. And then doing that again with the second production run was unexpected. And that it just like continued to happen. And so wins back then were very simple. It's like selling through each production run. And then it was launching a new product, going from a single SKU to then launching a chicken bone broth. And then it was launching multiple SKUs. And it was like each time that we were able to sell in a new SKU to Whole Foods, it started out with just beef. And then it was nationals like beef, mushroom chicken, and chicken. And it was just every win was incredibly exciting. Every win is still exciting for Kettle and Fire. And I just think, with the new company Light Labs 0 to 1, it's very much the same thing. It's like your first customer, like your first lab location, your first enterprise customer, right? It's just you're playing that process over and over again of building from the ground up, 0 to 100 million. It's a journey. It takes a lot. And it takes a lot of these wins to just happen over and over again and compound in order to build a material business. So for Kettle and Fire, it's Costco National is like a huge win for us now. Like everyday rotation, massive. And that's something that we could never have even thought of back in 2015, 2016. I mean, hell, even like 2018, 2019.
Yeah.
It was a hope and a dream of, hey, maybe we can be Costco ready in Costco one day. And now it's a reality. So we're still finding those massive wins that gets everyone on the team, everyone in the company incredibly hyped and excited about.
Yeah, and that lets us transition over to Light Labs. And I want to tell the story real quick. So I went to Supply Side Global because, we have the manufacturing company, and I'm like, okay, I need to go to this event. I had never been to one. And they've got the app, and people can message you on there to set up meetings. And this was a giant networking event. And you had messaged me on there and you said, hey, I'm in town. I don't have a booth set up. I'm there to meet with people. And I have a testing company and I'm a manufacturer. And I thought, I'm looking for a testing company because we have some, but as you know, and you'll probably talk about, man, it is so hard to get a good, reliable testing company to just do things across the board reliably, right? Just even do stuff on time. Like it's been so fucking frustrating for me.
Yeah.
And the fact that you messaged me, I had no idea who you were. You didn't care either. Like you didn't say anything about, you're like, hey, I'm here representing, Light Labs. So we set up a time and Leslie was there with me. We sat down and talked to you and got to know you. And I was super impressed. So then when I went back, because I always do my research, and I'm like, this guy's built this giant empire doing hundreds of millions of dollars. He just messaged me, met me in the trenches. He's out there. Like you're one of the guys in the trenches. And I really relate to that. And you never talked about anything else. It was more about, hey, what can I do to help your company? That's literally what you started off with. I just happened to like dig into you to find out more about you. So I started asking you questions. So then you had started, when did Light Labs start? And then let's talk about that because there are people out there that
Yeah.
are interested in testing.
Yeah. So it started really out of frustration. You just outlined every frustration that we've had as a brand ourselves. And then as we launched our manufacturing facility experience on a different scale of we spend so much money on lab testing. And when we get back, it's just thousands of PDFs that we're trying to make sense of. Are we turning in the right direction? Are we compliant? What claims can we make? As a brand, we wanted to lean into transparency, show, like the nutritional thumbprint that's unique and specific to bone broth that we have, that we're free of the contaminants and toxins that we know our consumers care about. And the idea was, hey, we can just take this big cost center, which is our lab testing budget, and reframe as a marketing investment by pushing lab data, lab results directly to product pages. And it was such a nightmare of an admin process. And when I just kind of double clicked into what do we think about our lab partners in general, and we just kind of realized that we experienced similar frustrations across the board over and over again. It's like you send in a product, enters a black box, you are told it's going to be ready on a certain date. That date comes and goes, no response, no connection. Anytime that we want to get a quote, for expanded testing scope. It takes many, many days to get back to us. And it's wild to me when I asked the question, like, what would a modern day lab look like? The answer was, well, it would be antithetical to almost what exists today. It's
Yeah.
one that's software forward, allows you to remove the bottlenecks and points of friction associated with lab testing, and then also a lab with the explicit goal of bringing lab data in platform that allows you to automate QA/QC workflows, automate compliance, R&D, and then the click of a button, you can embed lab results directly into product pages to use as a conversion tool where you can win customers through transparency. And so that was the idea. Back to earlier point in our conversation, just building the thing for ourselves first,
Yeah.
perfecting it, and then I shouldn't say perfected. There's still plenty that we need to want to solve for, want to grow into. But if we could build this lab for ourselves and it was a better experience, reason to believe that it could be a better experience for other brands, other manufacturers. And so that's really how Light Labs came about, was because of just the pain points and frustrations that we were experiencing at Kettle and Fire.
Yeah. And I hope I'm not going to put you on the spot this next question, but there are things out there, and I don't know how well these are tested, but I feel like there's certain things, peptides are all the rage right now,
Hmm.
right? And there's research, and my hands are doing air quotes, research companies out there that are selling GLP-1s, and they're selling, like, you basically get anything you want, and these sites are being shut down left and right. Um, I've never seen any testing done on any of these research sites ever. Do you have any insight into that? Do you have any? I know there are a lot of bad actors out there,
Yeah.
but we own a telemed clinic, and I tell my clients, I'm like, listen, if you're going to use terzepatide, get it from our clinic or your doc or whoever, because we
Yeah.
know that it's pharmaceutical grade. These research sites drive me crazy. And I've got
Yeah.
friends who are listening to this right now that they use it or they push it for their clients. And I fucking hate it, because
Yeah.
if I sold protein that was only 17 grams of protein, not 25 grams of protein, I would literally be crucified on social media.
Yeah.
But all these research companies are selling the shit. You don't even know how accurate it is.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight into that whatsoever?
I mean, look, the New York Times just posted an article literally 2 days ago, and the three headline stats were like BPC 157 contained higher levels of lead, concerning levels and amounts of lead. TB 500 contained endotoxins, and then less than 42% of some of these peptides, the labeled dose, or sorry, they contain 42% less of the labeled dosing claim for the majority of these peptides. And it's
Wow.
like, okay, these peptides are very expensive. Also, you're injecting them directly into your body. Therefore, extra precautions should be taken. And I've been pretty shocked at the how nonchalant some of my friends and people that I'm very close to that really
Same.
care about health, wellness, have just jumped straight into peptides, where I am long on peptides generally. I think it's going to be massive. I think it's going to be incredibly beneficial. But to your point, it's just incredibly easy to get, sell, push peptides. And we'll see how things change today. But historically, you haven't had to test, haven't had to prove efficacy, but also safety of these. So yeah, it's concerning. There should be way more testing, and I am cautiously optimistic on additional regulations coming into play. Where again, I think it should be accessible to people who want them. Uh, you should be able to take them without any concerns as to lead, endotoxins, and potency.
Yeah, I absolutely would not put something in my body if I knew it wasn't tested. Just no fucking
Correct.
way. Like, no way.
Correct.
Yeah. Let's talk about, we're wrapping up here because I could keep going. Lisa, do you have any questions that you've thought of that you want to add in before I add in a couple?
Later at the end, more personal in regards to Nick's knee and the recovery with the bone broth.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Let's go ahead and get those in now.
All right. Well, I was just curious what that recovery was like due to the help of bone broth and how your knee is doing these days.
Yeah, I invested a lot in recovery, so I don't think I can point to any one thing in particular. But good news is it's going incredibly well today. No issues whatsoever. But some other things I did were like PRP and also stem cell injections a few years back to just further amplify and accelerate. Where I injured it again, comically enough, in a scooter accident in the good old Lyme days of like 2019, retore most of my knee. And rather than opting for surgery, I went the PRP and stem cell injection route, which was incredibly efficacious. So, of course, re-upped my bone broth intake. But yeah, knees totally fine today. So no
That's awesome
complaints.
to hear.
I'll chalk it up to
I'm
bone broth. I'll chalk it up to bone broth.
for sure. And yeah, I was also just gonna give a shout out to that one manufacturer that gave you a shot as an 18-year-old because you mentioned you called up so many places and they said they couldn't make it shelf stable. And I think to people listening, if you're ever considering or doubting hiring someone just because of their age or because of an idea that seems sort of strange, I think it often pays off very, very well. So yeah, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, we would not be where we are today if it wasn't looking for them. So
Mhm.
a lot of gratitude.
Couple things I want to ask you about here. Something I've just really been big on the last 5 years. So what I've been doing it for 20 years, and I've just noticed these last few years, all these massive doors they just keep opening, right? So now, you're 10 years in business, all these connections that you've made, right? Some good, or most good, I'm sure some bad, but doors that just keep opening for you. Is there anything you can speak on to that about either new connections that you make or a new person that you do business with or what have you? Like, how important is that after 10 years in business? Because a lot of
Yeah,
this you probably didn't have right in the beginning, but I assume
no,
like it's a much different thing where if people will just stay with it, like all these doors start to open. Can you talk about that?
yeah. I mean, I always joke that my only superpower in life is serendipity. And the reason I say that is at a young age, I was just willing to try anything and everything to slightly increase the odds of success. Right. Anytime you do that, you just increase and expand the surface area for serendipitous things to happen. And I look at the way I build my network, the way I build relationships, not necessarily in a transactional way, but early on, it's like, hey, I'm going to say yes to meeting as many people as possible. I want to simply because I genuinely believe that it does increase and expand surface area for serendipitous encounters to take place. And so it's something I was intentional of back then. I think as I've kind of gotten a little bit older and got back into the building seat 0 to 1, there is a lot to be said about just focusing on executing the one thing that needs to get done in order to unlock the next phase, the next stage of growth. And so I'm now way more protective of my time,
Yeah.
and probably less of these like chance encounters or less of these saying yes to meeting new people, going to new events, simply because I would say that was the last 10 years, which has put me in a really fortunate position where a great network and tend to be able to kind of quickly move things along from 0 to 1. So it's less of a need today, but very much would not be where I am if it wasn't for like intentionally building network, putting myself out there, not being afraid to try and iterate through a lot of different ideas, in order to get to like the right answer, the right solution. So impactful, but comically enough, like less of a focus today, which I wouldn't necessarily say is like an ego thing, but it's more like we just know what needs to be executed here at Light Labs,
Yeah.
and you just got to be heads down building.
Yeah, and let's real quick. Let's end on social media. If people want to check out all your different companies and where they can see that stuff, we'll have that in the show notes, so they can definitely see that. I don't see a social media footprint for you. Can you talk about that? Is that's not very common, but I don't
Yeah,
see you anywhere on social.
I have no social media, so LinkedIn is the only, if you can call that social media, only thing I have, and I
Yeah,
think that you know was actually defensive in the sense of when I didn't go to college. What I didn't want to do is see everyone having the time of their life as I'm living at home trying to start a bone broth company. And so it was this intentional decision of I wanted to focus on building, didn't want my focus to be old in many different ways, and didn't want to build this sense of like, what am I missing out? Right. Because I would argue that, you know, going through the early shit to get to where I am today was totally worth it. But if I was exposed to the amount of fun my friends were having in college, those first 2 years, especially where bone broth, like it was not fun calling all these manufacturers, getting told no many times. And wondering if I just made a massive mistake by not going to college with my friends and then having to start a year or 2 years behind. Um, I think I would have been less willing to just embrace the suck and push through if I saw what was available and accessible to me at college through social media, right? And once then things started to work, I just I didn't feel the need. I saw how incredibly addictive it could be. I
Yeah.
understand that there's a lot of benefit to like personal brand awareness. But to be totally honest, I would love to build multiple companies, have multiple exits, and no social media presence and profile. So that's kind of the goal is just build underneath all of it, which is quite frankly what I care about the most, right? Is just building with people I like building with, and building in areas that I care deeply about. And if those things are true, then obviously there's a lot of personal things I look to be true as well. Um, Fairly well-rounded life that I don't think social media adds much benefit.
No, that's
100% agree. And I imagine too, do you ever get asked to speak? Do you get asked for any kind of engagements like that? Is that something that you've done?
Uh, yes, limited. I tend to, similar to social media, keep a lower profile.
Yeah.
I do think, in the next year or two, I genuinely care about the mission of Light Labs and what we're doing here. And I think part of that means that, I do want to talk about it, do want to speak about it. So I think prior, bone broth was interesting, building at a young age was interesting, always kind of had some conversations, was on podcasts, gave some talks around that. But I think there was kind of this gap where, started a business in the fintech space that wasn't necessarily uniquely interesting. And what I realized looking back is I did it because I thought there was a great opportunity to build great business, but there was no real mission and impact or intention behind that. Now that Light Labs, there is mission, impact, and intention, I find myself being a little bit more compelled to speak and talk about it. So historically, no, but it is something that I'm slowly gaining a little bit more interest in, which I did not think would be true.
Yeah, I think you definitely have a massive amount to contribute to help out. There's a young Nick out there somewhere, right? That or a massive amount of people. And this finally, let's talk about so what's next? Do you have anything that you haven't talked about that you're excited about? What's next for you?
I actually think what I'm excited about is, you know, even when I was building other companies, exploring other ideas, my attention could easily get pulled towards this new shiny object or new shiny idea. And I think the most exciting thing is Light Labs is the most exciting thing in my life. Next to getting married this year, of course, but most exciting thing in my professional life where I just don't feel compelled nor am I interested in exploring anything else but lab testing, how can we increase transparency in the food system, and knowing that I want to build this for the next 15 to 20 years, which is a very unique new feeling that I'm excited by. So it's actually lack of exciting things outside of one that gets me stoked.
Yeah. I love it. Well, thank you so much I know you're incredibly busy. Thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Again, check out the show notes. We'll put your LinkedIn profile on there and we'll put the links to the other companies so people can check you out. And man, we're excited for you. So we hope everyone
Appreciate it.
enjoyed this episode. From myself, Nick, and Lisa, we're out of here. See you guys.